Always dreamed of a 90, 95 and up yard. As soon as I caught the ball and I seen it all over the open space, I was like, I can't get that. He knew he out-schemed and out-toughed and out-played and out-called teams along.
Here's a first down and more. Flag on the play. Turpin is gone. Will it stand?
Maybe one. I don't think it's going to make a big deal.
That may be picked off. Let's take the no interception. Formation here. And is Murray on the keep inside. Oh, Kyler Murray. Turn on the afterburner. He's gone.
Goal. End zone. Caught. Higgins. Touchdown. Bengals win. And they are alive in the playoff.
What if the man standing at the top of his game, the one millions cheered for every Sunday, was leading a life so horrifying?
Going into the game, we heard rumors about whether or not they was going to kick the ball to us.
We knew that Devin Hester was the best returner in the league. He had a lot of big plays, several touchdowns that year.
It made his highlight reel irrelevant. What if the same player who danced in the end zone was drugging women in hotel rooms across the country that same night? And what if that player wasn't a bench warmer, a backup, or a troubled talent, but a five-time Pro Bowl safety?
Pulls the trigger. One-on-one. Lewis. Oh, incredible!
There's the catch. Ball never hit the ground. Incredible catch.
A Super Bowl champion and a rising TV star. This isn't fiction. This is the story of Darren Sharper, a man who went from locking down receivers to luring victims, a man whose hands were once raised in victory and later handcuffed in silence. He wasn't just a football star, he was a serial predator in a number 42 jersey, and the NFL, the fans, the media, they didn't stop him. They protected him. Darren Sharper had everything a professional athlete could dream of. Drafted in the first round in 1997, 5 Pro Bowls, 63 career interceptions, tied for 7th most in NFL history, a Super Bowl ring with the New Orleans Saints, a lucrative post-retirement job as a television analyst on NFL Network, the charisma, the face, the statistics, the storybook career. He was supposed to be next in line for Canton, a near lock for the Hall of Fame. But Darren Sharper wasn't just building a legacy on the field. He was building a pattern behind closed doors, a pattern that would reveal him as one of the most dangerous predators in modern sports history. From New Orleans to Las Vegas, Miami to Los Angeles, women came forward. Different names, different cities, same method. They had no idea the man offering them a drink was already carrying the drug. They didn't know the charm, the trust, the NFL aura was part of a strategy. He didn't need to chase victims. They walked right up to him. And that's what made it so terrifying. Because Darren Sharper wasn't hiding in the shadows. He was doing it in plain sight, in VIP sections, after parties, team hotels, wearing suits, flashing rings, signing autographs. And every time the accusations surfaced, they were ignored, delayed, and buried beneath his resume. This isn't just a story about Darren Sharper. It's about what happens when a celebrity becomes camouflage, when the system refuses to believe a hero can be a monster, and when a man who should have been remembered for his interceptions is instead remembered for something far darker. In the world of professional football, few athletes ever have it all: performance, reputation, charisma, legacy. Darren Sharper did. From the moment he entered the NFL in 1997 as a first-round draft pick for the Green Bay Packers, Sharper was seen as one of the league's golden boys. He wasn't just talented, he was calculated, intelligent, and remarkably consistent. Over a 14-year career, he intercepted 63 passes, returned 11 of them for touchdowns, and finished tied for 7th all-time in career interceptions. Defensive coordinators trusted him, fans admired him, teammates respected him, broadcasters loved him. He was clean-cut, camera-ready, and marketed as one of the league's gentlemen. He dressed in designer suits, smiled in every post-game interview, and walked with the kind of confidence that came from knowing the world was in his hands. When he won a Super Bowl with the New Orleans Saints in 2010, it wasn't just a team victory. It felt like the crowning of a personal brand. He wasn't just a football player, he was a public figure. Endorsements followed. He appeared regularly on the NFL Network as an analyst. He was being groomed for life after football. and for a moment, it looked like his legacy was sealed. But legacy is a fragile thing, because while the public saw a leader, a role model, and a future Hall of Famer, something far more disturbing was developing in the shadows. A darkness no one wanted to believe. Even as warning signs quietly flickered in the background, police reports whispered where news headlines stayed silent, rumors swirled where red carpets rolled. And as Darren Sharper climbed higher in the world of sports and celebrity, so did the number of victims he left behind. The image was perfect, but what hid beneath it was horrifying. As Darren Sharper's public profile grew, so did the quiet unease behind closed doors. The man who had become a symbol of professionalism in the NFL was beginning to appear in places where reputations go to die. The inside of police reports. But not for violence, not for drugs, not even for disorderly conduct. The earliest reports were murkier, harder to define, but deeply troubling. There were women, alcohol, unconsciousness, and Sharper, always nearby, always uncharged. In 2011, during his final NFL season, rumors started circulating in New Orleans. Women whispered about strange nights, about waking up confused in unfamiliar rooms with no memory of how they got there. Some brushed it off, some told friends. A few went to the police, but nothing stuck. Sharper's reputation worked like armor. He was a Super Bowl champion, a media darling, and more importantly, he was calm, articulate, and always cooperative. The perfect public persona had become the perfect legal shield. The authorities were hesitant. Prosecutors declined to press charges due to insufficient evidence. Internal whispers at the Saints organization, if they existed, were never made public. He retired without scandal, walked off the field with his reputation intact, and stepped straight into a broadcast booth. From football hero to television analyst, his life had only moved up. But beneath the surface, something sinister was gaining momentum. Because Darren Sharper didn't just walk away from football with stats and rings, he walked away with unchecked power. And without the discipline of a locker room or the eyes of a coach, the mask began to slip. What was once a whispered suspicion was about to become a pattern no one could ignore. After Darren Sharper retired from the NFL, the transition appeared seamless. He moved from the field to the broadcast booth with ease. Now wearing a suit instead of a jersey, he was polished, charismatic, and poised. Exactly the kind of ex-player networks wanted. He wasn't just another talking head. He was a recent champion with Hall of Fame credentials. NFL Network signed him as a full-time analyst. Fans trusted his voice. Production crews respected his professionalism. To the public, Darren Sharper was still a success story. The kind of man young players were supposed to become after football. But while viewers saw a career being reborn, law enforcement in multiple cities began to see something very different. A pattern. A dark, methodical, and deeply unsettling pattern. In late 2013, reports started surfacing in New Orleans about a disturbing incident involving Sharper and a woman who claimed she was drugged at his condo. That alone could have been dismissed as a he said, she said situation, especially given Sharper's stature and clean public record. But what made this case different was what came next. Within weeks, police in Los Angeles reported a nearly identical allegation. Then, another emerged in Las Vegas. Then, Arizona. Then, Miami. One after another, across multiple states, women were coming forward. And every single account followed the same terrifying script. Sharper would attend an event or a nightclub, often on assignment or while visiting a city with NFL ties. He would meet a woman, flash the familiar smile, charm her, and offer a drink. That drink, authorities would later reveal, was often laced with sedatives such as zolpidem or morphine, a potent mix designed to incapacitate quickly. The women wouldn't even make it through the night. They would wake up hours later, disoriented, often partially undressed, with no memory of what had occurred, and Sharper would either be gone or acting as if nothing had happened. The consistency of these accounts was horrifying. Different cities, different women, different dates, but the same formula, executed with chilling precision. Prosecutors began calling it what it was: a serial rape pattern. This wasn't reckless behavior or a one-time mistake. This was premeditated, planned, controlled. Still, the response was slow. Despite multiple police reports being filed, there was hesitation. Not only because of the lack of physical evidence in some cases, but because it was Darren Sharper, a Super Bowl champion, a TV personality, a man with decades of goodwill built on a public image so clean, it created doubt even in the minds of investigators. How could someone so admired be capable of this? Meanwhile, Sharper remained silent. He denied the allegations. His lawyers issued short, generic statements. NFL Network, without drawing attention, suspended him. There were no media headlines, no disciplinary press releases, just a quiet removal from the spotlight, the kind of soft exile that powerful men are often granted when accusations haven't yet turned into handcuffs. But for the women, many of whom had been dismissed, ignored, or talked out of pressing charges, that silence was a second betrayal. They were watching the man who hurt them still appear on television, still walk red carpets, still be celebrated, still be free. But not for much longer, because detectives in Los Angeles, New Orleans, and Phoenix had begun connecting the dots across state lines. Warrants were being issued, charges were being prepared, and for the first time, the name Darren Sharper was no longer being whispered. It was about to be dragged into the national spotlight, not as a football hero, but as a calculated predator. The mask hadn't just cracked. It was disintegrating. By early 2014, the dam finally broke. On February 14th, Darren Sharper was arrested in Los Angeles and charged with drugging and raping 2 women. The news sent shockwaves through the sports world. This wasn't just another ex-athlete in trouble. This was a former Super Bowl champion, a Pro Bowl regular, and a national TV personality being accused of one of the most serious crimes imaginable. The charges were no longer isolated, no longer whispered. They were formal, public, and damning. Within days, the accusations in California triggered investigations in other cities. In Arizona, New Orleans, Nevada, and Florida, women came forward with chillingly similar stories. So similar that prosecutors couldn't ignore the pattern anymore. What emerged was something that looked less like coincidence and more like a blueprint. Sharper's strategy was detailed and disturbingly repeatable. He would carry powerful sedatives in pill form. He'd crush them, slip them into women's drinks, and wait. He operated with confidence, often in his own hotel rooms or rented apartments. In some cases, he had accomplices, people who allegedly helped him get women alone or stood by in silence while it happened. It was no longer about football. It was no longer about reputation. It was about how a man with wealth, fame, and an unblemished public persona had been allowed to carry out a string of assaults across the country for years without being stopped. The NFL immediately distanced itself. The league issued a short statement condemning the allegations. NFL Network officially terminated Sharper's employment. But for many, the damage had already been done. The question that hung over every headline wasn't just, did he do it? The evidence was quickly piling up. The real question was, how did no one stop him sooner? Because these weren't just legal cases, they were systemic failures. Sharper wasn't a shadow figure. He was everywhere, on the field, on camera, on red carpets, in VIP lounges. He had police friends. He had team connections. He had brand deals. Every layer of institutional trust had worked in his favor, until now. And when he was finally forced to sit in a courtroom, facing the women he drugged and violated, the silence that once protected him was replaced by the weight of undeniable truth. But the story wasn't over, because what was revealed next would turn an already horrifying case into one of the darkest criminal legacies the NFL has ever known. What prosecutors uncovered over the next several months stunned even the most hardened investigators. This wasn't just a case of one man committing crimes in one city. Darren Sharper had become the center of a multi-jurisdictional nightmare, a coordinated pattern of drug-facilitated sexual assaults across 5 U.S. states, with the possibility of more. As the testimonies came in, each new account sounded like an echo of the last. Women from different cities who had never met or spoken described identical sequences: being offered a drink by Sharper, losing consciousness within minutes, and waking up confused, disoriented, assaulted. Some remembered nothing. Some had flashes. Others suffered permanent trauma. The psychological effects were as devastating as the crimes themselves. In March 2014, Arizona became the second state to charge Sharper, and this time, the case included 2 counts of rape, 2 counts of drugging, and multiple additional felony charges. That same month, New Orleans filed its own charges, followed by Nevada and Florida. Each jurisdiction was now working independently, but all were seeing the same man, the same method, and the same terrifying scope. That's when the federal government stepped in. In 2015, the U.S. Department of Justice moved to consolidate the charges into a multi-state federal plea deal, something rarely seen in cases like this. The reason? Prosecutors believed they were dealing with a serial offender whose conduct spanned across state lines, which meant he wasn't just dangerous, he was nationally predatory. The charges were staggering: drug distribution with intent to commit rape, sexual assault, conspiracy, and aggravated rape. The evidence included texts, testimonies, timelines, and a pattern that left no room for doubt. He wasn't out of control. He was in control the entire time. This was organized, premeditated, and remorseless. In his plea agreements, Sharper admitted to drugging and raping multiple women across California, Arizona, Nevada, and Louisiana. The words were as chilling as they were simple. A man once considered a role model, a leader, a future Hall of Famer, now a confessed serial rapist. The courtrooms were silent. Some victims wept. Others stared, cold and empty-eyed, as the man who stole their dignity now sat in shackles, speaking words they had waited years to hear. But even as justice approached, another question loomed large. How did he get this far? How many lives were shattered before someone believed them? This wasn't just about Darren Sharper anymore. This was about every system that failed to stop him. As Darren Sharper's plea deals became public, the NFL's golden image shattered into 1,000 pieces. What had once been speculation, then suspicion, was now confession. Not only had Sharper admitted to drugging and raping women, he confessed to doing it across multiple states, using the same method over and over again. It was mechanical, clinical, predatory. But what truly broke the silence wasn't the court filings. It was the voices, the women whose pain had been ignored for years. One victim, who chose to remain anonymous, described waking up on a hotel bed in Los Angeles with her clothes scattered on the floor and a ringing in her ears. "I didn't remember saying yes. I didn't remember anything after the first drink," she told investigators. "I knew something had happened. I just didn't know how to prove it." Another woman from New Orleans gave a gut-wrenching statement during the sentencing hearing. "I used to see Darren Sharper on TV. I thought he was someone I could trust. He looked like a good man, a leader. I had no idea I was walking into the hands of a man who already decided what he would do to me. No matter what I said." The prosecutors were just as stunned. In an interview with CNN, one federal attorney called it the most calculated and widespread case of drug-facilitated sexual assault by a single individual we've ever seen in modern sports history. But perhaps the most chilling moment came when Sharper himself stood before the judge and spoke. His statement was cold, brief. "I'm sorry to the women I hurt. I take responsibility. I was wrong." No explanation, no emotion. Just empty words in a courtroom echoing with trauma. Even former teammates couldn't comprehend the man they once called one of the smartest guys in the locker room. One said privately to a reporter, "I shared a locker with him for 3 seasons. I never saw anything. But now I can't unsee it. I feel sick knowing what was really happening." Across the league, there was outrage and shame. Sports writers who once praised Sharper's intelligence and instincts now wrestled with the uncomfortable truth. They helped build his image. They helped cover the monster in gold. This wasn't a scandal. It was a betrayal of the fans, of the league, of every woman who had once been told, "You're exaggerating. You're making it up." Why would he do that? Because now we all knew the answer. He did it because he could. He did it because we let him. In August 2016, Darren Sharper was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison after pleading guilty to multiple counts of rape and drugging across 4 states. The courtroom was quiet, not in satisfaction, but in shock. For many, the number didn't feel like justice. It felt like a compromise, like something negotiated behind closed doors, just as his crimes had once been concealed by fame and silence. 18 years for at least 9 confirmed victims, with many believing there were more who either couldn't come forward or never would. Victim impact statements poured in. Some read aloud, others sealed due to the graphic nature of what they described. One woman who was assaulted in Las Vegas wrote, "The trauma didn't end that night. It lives in my body every single day. He stole my safety, and he smiled while he did it." Another described years of self-blame. "For a long time, I convinced myself it wasn't rape because I never said no. But I couldn't say no. I couldn't say anything. I was unconscious." That's what he counted on. Sharper stood silent for most of the hearing. When given the chance to speak, he offered a short apology, void of depth or detail. Some called it rehearsed, others called it hollow. He was then led out of the courtroom in an orange jumpsuit, shackled, expressionless, the final image of a man who once stood at the center of NFL glory. But the controversy didn't end there. Earlier in the trial, a federal judge had initially approved a 9-year sentence as part of a plea deal, a deal that sparked national outrage. When that recommendation was made public, women's rights advocates, legal scholars, and media outlets erupted in protest. 9 years for a calculated cross-state pattern of drug-facilitated rape? It wasn't just unjust. It felt insulting. It sent a message that even in the face of overwhelming evidence, a man with wealth and fame could still walk away with less than a decade of consequence. The outcry worked. That original sentence was scrapped. A new federal judge handed down the 18-year sentence. But for the victims, it wasn't a victory. Not really. As one survivor told reporters, "I didn't want more years. I wanted people to believe me when I first spoke up. I wanted someone to stop him before I became another name on the list." The NFL remained largely silent. There were no investigations into what the league may have known, no public apology, no sweeping changes, no league-wide reckoning. Darren Sharper's name was quietly erased from highlight reels and Hall of Fame conversations. His stats remain, but without context, they're just numbers. The man behind them is now a number 2, an inmate ID in a federal prison. Justice came, but it came late, and by the time it did, the damage was irreversible. By the time Darren Sharper was sentenced, the facts were clear. The evidence was overwhelming. His guilt was undeniable. But the question that refused to go away, the one that haunted survivors, investigators, and even prosecutors, was how it had gone on for so long. Sharper didn't hide. He didn't work in shadows. He wasn't elusive. He assaulted women in cities where he was a celebrity. Sometimes while working as an NFL analyst, other times while making promotional appearances or attending events thrown in his honor. He used his charm like a tool, and his fame like armor. And time after time, it worked. He had access to team doctors, private security, and connections within local law enforcement. In some cities, he was recognized before he even stepped through the club doors. People assumed he was safe because he was famous. He didn't raise suspicion because he was Darren Sharper. That name meant something, until it meant something else. But the system that protected him wasn't just about wealth or football. It was about credibility and who gets to have it. When victims came forward, they weren't just disbelieved. They were dismissed. Some police reports never made it past the front desk. Others were quietly shelved by prosecutors who cited insufficient evidence, even when multiple women had come forward with nearly identical experiences. What they were really saying was, "He's too important. He's too polished. He's too high profile. We don't want to believe it." It wasn't just law enforcement. The NFL never investigated. No league-wide statement was made acknowledging the victims. No team executives were questioned about whether they'd heard the whispers, and if they had, why they chose to ignore them. Sharper's case exposed something deeply unsettling, that the culture of celebrity in professional sports can become a shield for predators. That image outweighs instinct, that winning trumps accountability. The silence surrounding his crimes wasn't accidental. It was engineered, a mixture of disbelief, discomfort, and willful blindness that allowed him to keep walking red carpets while survivors were left in isolation, doubting themselves, blaming themselves, wondering why no one else seemed to care. And while Sharper's name is now erased from the Hall of Fame ballots, his story left a scar that doesn't fade with a prison sentence, because this wasn't just a failure of one man's morality, it was a failure of everyone who looked away. For the women Darren Sharper assaulted, the prison sentence brought closure, but it didn't bring peace. Long after the courtrooms emptied, the headlines faded, and Sharper's name was scrubbed from NFL memory. The victims were left to live with something far more permanent, trauma without an expiration date. What Sharper took wasn't just a night or a body, it was their sense of safety, of memory, of self. Some of the women struggled with PTSD, others with addiction, depression, or years of silence before they were even able to speak his name again. A few disappeared from public view entirely. The fear that no one would believe them, that people would ask what they were wearing or why they accepted the drink, still hovered even after his guilty plea. Because when your rapist is a national hero, the question isn't just, did it happen? It's, why would he do that to you? And for those who didn't come forward in time, those who saw their stories reflected in news articles years too late, the pain was compounded by guilt. Guilt for not knowing, guilt for trusting, guilt for thinking they were alone. Even now, when Darren Sharper's name is mentioned in passing, in a stat comparison, an old Saints clip, or a whatever happened to meme segment, there's a jarring contrast. His records remain, his highlights exist, but the cost of what he did isn't seen in yards or tackles. It's seen in therapy rooms, in sealed medical files, in the lives derailed without warning. And that's what makes this story so difficult and so important, because Sharper wasn't a predator lurking in the shadows. He was front and center, smiling, signed, celebrated. His victims walked toward him willingly, not because they were careless, but because they trusted who the world told them he was. That betrayal is what lingers. No banner in a stadium, no jersey in the rafters, just a name that once inspired cheers, and now echoes in courtrooms and memories as a warning. Darren Sharper's story didn't end with a trophy. It didn't end with a gold jacket or a retirement ceremony. It ended in a cold prison cell, surrounded by the silence he once used to commit unthinkable crimes. But even now, years later, the full impact of what he did hasn't been properly measured. Because the truth is, you can't measure the damage he left behind. You can count interceptions, you can count touchdowns, but you can't count the therapy sessions, the lost trust, the nights women still wake up gasping for air, trying to make sense of a nightmare that didn't come from a stranger in an alley, but from a man the world told them to admire. Sharper's name should have been immortalized in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. He had the stats, the rings, the highlight reels. But now, that name has been exiled from the sport's history, not by a suspension, not by a fumbled pass, but by his own depravity. His fall is unlike any in NFL history, not because of how far he dropped, but because of how long he hid in plain sight. And maybe that's the part we still struggle to accept, that a man could be so successful, so adored, and so evil all at once. This isn't just about football. This is about power, privilege, and the silence that enables predators to thrive. It's about the cost of blind trust, failures of institutions, and the pain that fame can so easily mask. And it's about the victims, whose names we may never know, but whose stories are the real legacy of Darren Sharper. Because in the end, this wasn't a scandal. This was a tragedy, one that could have been prevented if someone somewhere had chosen to listen.